Now for the seventh plague. In the verses 17 through 21. The circumstances of the Euphrates River drying, that began that movement where Satan's demons are gathering the nations, the war against Israel, in hopes of destroying all of human life. But Jesus will come and end that war. They won't end it, he will. So now in the seventh and last plague, we read, "Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, 'It is done.'" So these bowls have been poured out on people, specifically on the earth, the sea, the rivers and springs, the sun, Satan's kingdom, Euphrates River, and now the air. So you see it's almost covering everything. And we don't see the immediate effects on the air per se. At first, what we see is a loud voice that comes from the throne. That voice confirms that it's been completed. That voice is the voice of Christ, and it's confirming the completion of one stage, and now the next is his return, his coming. Now, that word in Greek, when it says "it is done," it's just one word, and it's in the perfect tense, meaning it has been done, and therefore now we are in the results of it being finished. And I don't know if any verses come to your mind, but a parallel to that is when Christ was on the cross in John's gospel, the loud voice he cries, "It is finished." In Greek, that's one word that's in a perfect tense, meaning a past action with a present result. There it was a redemption was accomplished, and his work was done. Here, the work of patience and pouring out his wrath is over. And now he can redeem the whole world, the creation of the world, as Romans 8 talks about, how the creation, not people, the creation itself groans with mournings, waiting for Christ's return so they can be released from the curse. So there is an earthly reaction to this loud voice. In verse 18 and 19, it says, "And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and there was a great earthquake, such as there had not been since man came to be upon the earth. So great the earthquake was it, and so mighty. And the great city was split into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the great was remembered before God, to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found." Now, the first image that John sees when the loud voice proclaimed is this lightning, the sounds, and the thunders. We saw these images already in Revelation. When John first goes into that heavenly scene in chapter 4, verse 5, sees the throne, these things is what he saw. In chapter 8, verses 5, right before the trumpets come, at the last seal, sees these signs. In chapter 11, verse 19, at the seventh trumpet, he sees, and which is the beginning of the seals, he sees these things in heaven. So now here, at the seventh plague, he sees these as well. And we've communicated and talked about these things. Lightning shows judgment language. The sounds, literally in Greek, it's voices. Probably refers to commandments or instructions. And thunder regularly speaks of speech or communication from God. And putting them together, it communicates that he is active and willing his angels all around him to do his will. And all of these things, these three images of lightning, voices, sounds, and thunders, it is reminiscent of Exodus, where God is Mount Sinai in Exodus 19, where all of those things are found. So it communicates this is God's presence. It's becoming far more real, and his glory is becoming far more full, coming into the earth, into Earth's reality. And with the coming of that, just like in Sinai, there's an earthquake. There's a huge earthquake. It tells us that God's full glorious presence is broken in. And the earth violently shakes because it can't handle God's glory, his presence. It's in a fallen state. And John here in the text focuses on that earthquake. Its great power and its destruction. Verse 19 says the great city was split into three parts. Now that great city is going to refer to Jerusalem, as it has in chapter 11. And that earthquake creates some kind of division. It doesn't say that the city falls, it's just that it's divided into three parts. Now, why three parts? Today, Jerusalem is divided into four quarters. There's a Christian quarter, a Muslim quarter, an Aramean quarter, and a Jewish quarter. But we're not talking about quarters here. And Jerusalem's going to look a lot different when the Antichrist takes over that region. Here it says the city is split in three. Now, why? I don't know. I don't know why it's divided into three. The earthquake causes a division, but the cities of the nations, they fall. It's clear that there's a distinction. Some are split and some fall. So the cities of nations, they fall. When we talk about the cities, especially in the ancient world, cities are strength of a nation. That's where the walls are, people live, it's their defenses, it's their life. So here we see the strength of the nations are defeated. Just at God starting to come, starting to break into creation, his presence. So it's the earthquake who ultimately defeats all of the nations, the power of the nations. And then verse 19, the second half, it says, Babylon the Great is remembered before God. So what we talked about earlier, which we'll talk about in chapter 17 and 18, this is going to refer to the Islamic world. So whatever is left of the Islamic Empire is going to be destroyed here. And literally in chapter 17 and 18, John's going to give us that vision of the Antichrist and the Islamic world fighting together, and ultimately Islam's fall. And it says here that Babylon the Great was remembered. Now this is a Hebrewism, a Semitic euphemism that means God's going to remember what she has done, what they have done, and thus punish her for her crimes, carry out judgment. And then verse 20, it says that every island fled and mountains were not found. That shows us a huge tectonic activity, which reshapes everything. And the image is that the earth will become one plane. And once again, we see this in the Old Testament. Zechariah 14:10 says that all the land will be changed into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will rise and remain on its site. Isaiah 40, verse 4 says, let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Same thing in Ezekiel. And then Psalm 97, verse 5 says, the mountains melt like wax in the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. It creates an image of the earth with no barriers, no divisions among the people. And the only mountain or elevated spot is Mount Zion, which is fitting. God will be above and ruling the world in the one true just world government, the one world government. So think about this. If the cities are all falling because of the earthquake, and buildings are falling, and structures are falling, and mountains are falling, where are you going to go? Where are people who are still alive, where are they going to go? They're going to go out in the field. They're going to go out in the open. And that sets the scene for what actually happens in the seventh plague on the air. Verse 21, and huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, because its plague was extremely severe. So as they're running away from buildings cover, they're being pelted with hail. When it says it comes from the heaven, that just means the sky. And what's their reaction? They blaspheme God. They refuse to attribute the hail as punishment from God, the God of the universe, and they continue to harden their hearts like Pharaoh, and they attribute it to an evil force. And thus they continue to worship the Antichrist or someone else. So this plague and thus its signs of God's glory and power are huge. And it's shown by the repetition in the text of the word great. All these words just show at this end there's a crescendo, there's a climax. And the plague of hail is reminiscent of the seventh plague in Egypt, where it says, behold, about this time tomorrow I will send a very heavy hail, such as not been seen in Egypt. Well, now it's going to be like not seen ever. And in Egypt, and in Exodus, it's literally the text says, hail's coming tomorrow, so you know what you need to do? You need to stay inside. That's what it says in Exodus. Well, can they stay inside now? No, there's no cities. There's no buildings. Also of the first trumpet, where there was hail that fell, that was mixed with fire. Here, it's just large hail. And in the Greek, it's approximately 100 pounds, which is huge. Hail would be about 17.6 inches in diameter. So if you look at this ball, think about this ball dropping as hailstones. That would be, horrible. You don't want this thing landed on you or anywhere near you. And this ball is only about half the size. This is only about 8 inches. So you think of something double the size. That's what's falling. An amazing destruction. The Guinness Book of World Records from 1997 says the largest hailstone recorded in history fell in Bangladesh on April 14th, 1986, and it weighed 2.25 pounds. And it killed 92 people. So you can see here, this is extremely severe, and that's what the text says. And that word for extremely severe is only found here in the book of Revelation. And that event shows that when John sees this, it's extremely shocking. And this is a decisive event. And it's the climax which comes with the seventh bowl. And it speaks of utter destruction. There's nothing left. And all the people that are not killed, we know that there are people that still are going to be alive when Christ returns. So there are people that don't get killed, but there's a complete fragmentation of earthly life. The earth is so damaged and so destroyed, and people cannot go back to the way things were. They have to make a decision about God. And people can't continue life as before. That's the seventh and final plague. It's where God's wrath is complete, and now the earth is ready for him to come back. Every warning, every plague that was designed to show God's strength and power is done. And man is no longer given an opportunity to repent. So let's go over main points and applications. The first one is, even forces of evil will fulfill God's plan. And everything is working together to bring about Christ's promised rule on earth. The battle to come, which will be Satan's last attempt to stop Christ's rule, will demonstrate God's power and glory as Christ breaks into history and judges humanity. Number two, these last plagues will change the earth completely. Nothing can go back to the way it was. Humanity will be compelled to make a decision about Christ. This devastation occurs just before Christ will reclaim and restore the earth in the second coming. Even this destruction is another step towards the promised glorified kingdom. And as believers, when we see these things or go through them, those who were alive at the time are going to have to see these things that way. This is another step. Check. One step closer to Christ returning. And then number three, the point of it is we need to be awake and be dressed in his righteousness. We will not be able to stand before Christ unless we receive his righteousness through faith and are born again or born from above and have lives that reflect the love of God. So the question is, are you ready? Are you ready? And that's Revelation 16, 12 through 21, the 7 last plagues.